I mean, there was one that I found out. I loosely referred to it earlier about 1914 because that calculation that they had was evidence to me that the Bible was true. And when I found out that the starting position of that prophecy was completely wrong, they had it completely out, I was like, right, I need to go to the New South Wales State Library and have a look at that one. Anyway, I then start to question, all right, the Jehovah's Witnesses is definitely not it. And I'm beginning, like, it's a cult. It's extremely problematic. What do I feel about the Bible and God? Like, if I can be so wrong about this religion, what else am I wrong about? So I started to ask myself, well, why do you say you believe? And as I analyzed that honestly, I began to realize that any of the instances or experiences that I would say I felt the presence of God or I felt a connection were highly emotive states. And I began to realize I had no objective evidence whatsoever. That was all entirely subjective. And I have now just learned not to trust myself.
Welcome to another episode of RfR Deconstruction Stories. Lucky number 13, as it turns out. I'm Rob Palmer, and I'm an ambassador and helpline agent for recovering from religion. Often someone reaching out to us on the RfR helpline asks the agent that's helping them where they stand on their background on religious matters, if they want to hear about their deconstruction history. Well, personal disclosure is discouraged on the helpline. So this series is intended as an online resource for people with those questions about our volunteers. And now our agents can say, hey, go look at the Recovering from Religion YouTube channel and the RFR Deconstruction Stories playlist, and you can get all the information you've ever wanted. And hopefully people can stumble upon these who even haven't called us yet, and maybe it will help them out. So in this episode, I'll be talking with Sherrie D'Souza, who is the first ex-JW volunteer I'm recording for the series. Welcome, Sherrie, and thanks for agreeing to share your story here.
Ah, thank you for having me. I knew I was number 13, which I embrace wholeheartedly, but did not know I was the first ex-J-Dub. So that's even more exciting.
Yeah, so are there a lot of, so what would you guess is the percent of our volunteers who are ex-JWs?
Oh, I reckon there's a good amount, maybe between 5 to 10%, I'd say. Yeah,
Okay,
there are quite a
not very
few.
high.
Maybe no, not a huge part of the volunteer base. Although in Australia, as you'll hear a little bit further on, there are quite a few.
Okay. So for people who aren't that familiar, because it's a fairly small sect of Christianity, I guess first question, are you Christians? And if you are, what's the difference in mainstream Christianity, other Christians? The big one.
Okay. So yes, Jehovah's Witnesses do claim to be Christian. In fact, they claim to be, no surprise, the only form of true Christianity.
Where have I heard that before? Nowhere.
Yeah,
No
I
other
know, I
Christians
know.
think they're the only Christians.
No, I know,
True
I know.
Christians, the only true Christians.
Exactly, exactly. So they base that on, well, they say that they model their beliefs around the first century Christianity, which should send fear down anyone's spine, really. But anyhow,
Wait,
um,
and I have to stop there. Wasn't like
mm,
I'm not a historian at all, but my little recollection of what I've heard about Christian history is it wasn't really firmed up until 200, 300, 400 years after the birth of Christ.
correct,
So how do
correct.
they even know what it was like just that? How?
Just from how they interpret the Bible. They are Bible literalists, so they believe that, oh my goodness, this is all starting to come back, Rob. Um, they believe that true Christianity was how Christ modeled it when he was on the earth, and also how the first century Christians behaved. So they feel that what you just referred to as the second, third century on, that was the great apostasy that occurred after the last disciple or apostle died. And then Christianity deviated into this apostasy and is not the true form of Christianity. It was what was earlier. So they are, as you're no doubt picking up, Bible literalists. They're quite puritanical, and they will take their laws, what they regard as sins, directly from the scriptures.
So,
So,
all right. So the thing I always equate them with, because it's a fairly small sect of Christianity, which differs greatly from the others, Mormonism. So, but
mm,
Mormonism have another testament
mm,
besides the Bible. Does Jehovah's Witness have such a thing? No.
no. Well, they will claim they don't, but so you will hear while we talk about them that I will interchange Jehovah's Witnesses with Watchtower. And Watchtower is the legal organization, the legal framework. So the way it's set up is each of the congregations are the Christian congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses in whatever area, and they are set up as their own charity and not for profit, but they take all of their instructions from Watchtower. Um, Watchtower Bible and Tracts Society. So the evolution of Jehovah's Witnesses occurred from the Millerite movement in the 1840s. It's the same family tree from which Seventh-day Adventist Christadelphians come from. That Millerite movement ended up in what was called the Great Disappointment when they expected in the 1940s that 1940s, the 1840s, sorry, that Armageddon, the end of the world would come, that there would be this rapture. And when that didn't happen, hence the Great Disappointment, you had this fragmentation of belief systems that came from that. And so when you look at some of those religions, there are some cross threads, there are some points of similarity that come into each of them. So with the Seventh-day Adventists, they're millennialist as well, so is the Jehovah's Witnesses. And there's some ties into the way they view prophecy and numbers in the Bible, which is quite interesting. It comes from that same background.
Okay. So how does the eschatology, fancy word for people who don't know, for like end times predictions, like how is that in the church? Like, and evangelical Christians are very heavy into the rapture. Catholics never talk about that kind of thing. Where Jehovah's Witnesses stand on that?
Very different. So I think the first thing I've got to clear up is that they don't believe that everybody goes to heaven. They believe that there is a select group, the 144,000 that is mentioned in Revelation, that they are a group of kings and priests, and they are the only human element that will be in heaven, but they're in heaven for a purpose. They are in heaven as part of God's kingdom, where Christ is the head of that.
So so are these like only the 140, 144 is the number 1,000? Are these like but there's been more probably Jehovah's Witnesses like that are dead than that. So like how does that work? Is it just 140 that of the people are still alive, or are the dead resurrected and some of the 144,000 could be partly the dead people and partly living people? How does that work?
Ah, Rob, so many questions, and you are right to have all of them. So I'll take it back a bit. When after the Great Disappointment happened, there was one particular Bible student known as, well, his name was Charles Taze Russell. And he started to develop his own eschatology, his own theology on what he thought. And in the late 1870s, he produced the first article of the Watchtower, which was a magazine, and it was sent out as his thoughts. And a movement started to collect behind him that at the time were known as the Bible students. And that the 144,000, that idea, that did come from that period of time. And they thought, based on some some scriptures in Daniel and a prophecy in Daniel, one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, actually, that they had calculated when the kingdom would begin its rule. And when the kingdom would begin its rule, and I don't want to bore everybody with all the semantics in here, but there's a whole lot of calculations and stuff that's all rubbish anyway, but they get to 1914. And so before 1914, Charles Taze Russell and his band of followers are saying that 1914 is going to be when the kingdom begins its rule, and they were fully expecting that there would be a rapture then, which clearly did not happen. However, something of note in 1914 did happen, and that was World War I. And so they pivoted and said that World War I was evidence of a war in heaven where Satan was now cast out of the heavens and he had dominion over the earth for a short period of time before the end would finally come. Now, we still haven't addressed the fact that the 144,000 are now getting past that number. And so another pivot happens with the next president. So not Charles Taze Russell, but the follower, because he died in 1916. The next one was Judge Rutherford. And similar to your Mormons and Scientology, your next leader, your second, is the real autocrat, the one that makes huge changes. And that certainly was the case with Rutherford. He is the one that brings the name Jehovah's Witnesses to the fore. He actually changes the name of the organization to that in 1931. And in 1935, they announce this new group of survivors who are now the great crowd, right? So, and they take this from Revelation, because in Revelation chapters 12 and 14, it speaks of the 24 elders that are around the throne, and it also speaks about 144,000, but it also then talks about a great crowd. And so in their theology, they make these shifts in the 1900s that you still have the 144,000 that at some unspecified time after their death, at some point, and they've changed the lines several times as to when this point is, this group, this 144,000, will be resurrected into heaven and will form part of God's kingdom, part of the government that will then rule over the earth after Armageddon. So Armageddon is yet to come. Armageddon is like the flood. It's the great cleansing, right? It's the earth will be judged, assessed. Those that have followed Jehovah literally, they will survive Armageddon. Everybody else will be destroyed. And the survivors are then the great crowd class. They will bring the earth back to what it would have been in the Garden of Eden had Adam and Eve not sinned, because that was God's original purpose, was for everyone to live in paradise on earth. Yes, I know. I can tell all the expressions on your
Wait.
face.
So yeah, two people screwed up God's perfect plan. I don't. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't just, you have to also remember Satan's role in this.
Uh,
So it's Satan. They say, and how about that what Satan did was he raised the issue of God's sovereignty in the Garden of Eden, right? Would mankind be better off making their own decisions than what God would offer? And so there had to be the passage of time to prove beyond can't even say the word, irrevocable, whatever that word is, doubt, that mankind cannot rule themselves and that only God's kingdom can be the way forward. And so,
I'm going to harp on this,
yes.
but I'm still not clear on the 144,000. Like, what about the dead people? Do they rise from the dead and go to, or you're just screwed if you die before this happens?
No, there is a resurrection as
Ah,
well. So the line in the sand is Christ's death, right? Those they're still very unclear on who is part of the 144,000 and who isn't. They use Romans 8. I'm a bit rusty there, where there is a calling, and it's a kind of, if you know, you know, and if you
oh,
don't,
wow. So
you're
you
not.
can claim you know, and then
Yes,
you're what? Wow, that's intriguing. Yeah,
yes.
that's
So
like,
so it's very interesting to look at the numbers of the memorial each year. So the memorial is the only celebration, the only event they have per year that they recognize, or it's kind of the only ritualistic thing that they have, which is the commemoration of Christ's death and the purpose of it. And they celebrate it according to the Jewish calendar. So it's on Nisan 14. And the
wait,
only partake,
it's on what?
Nisan 14, which is according to the Jewish calendar.
I don't know. Nisan is a Hebrew name for a
It's a
month or
month.
something? Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's for the month. So it's when Passover is.
Okay.
is in Nisan 14.
Because
So
they
it
have a
has
lunar calendar.
origins.
It's a lunar calendar, so they
Yes,
go by that. Okay.
correct.
And Easter
Correct,
Easter
correct.
tracks that also because it has to be after the Passover because that's part of the same week. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I always found it interesting how they calculated when Nisan 14 was because it does not always correlate with Easter.
Hmm.
So yeah, I never went into that math, but anyway, so the Passover when they have the memorial, only those of the heavenly class, only those who are they know it, are part of the 144,000 can partake of the bread and the wine. So they follow what Christ did with the Last Supper of, this wine means my blood, this bread means my body. So they literally do a Passover where they hand the plate of bread along, like everybody has to touch it, right? But only those of the 144,000 can actually eat of it. The same with the
So,
wine.
well, wait. So some people at the table say I'm part of that, and they take it, and the other people, no, I'm probably not, and they let it go.
Yes. So
Wow,
there are
I cannot imagine being at a table like that.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, it's you're not at a table. You're just sitting in the auditorium. You're
No,
sitting in the
all right.
Kingdom Hall. Yeah, but point taken. Yeah. So that is the only really deep ritual thing that they have, and most congregations do not have one of the 144,000 in among their numbers because most of them are dead, right? And it's very rare now to have someone who claims to be of that class. And yet, I don't know if they still do, but they used to take numbers of how many people attended the memorial worldwide, and of that number, how many were partaking, which would indicate that there were still 144,000. And of note, Rob, it's very curious. That number of those partaking has been going up, not down.
So to be clear, you don't, all the rest of the people don't go to hell, right? You have another,
No,
right? So there's something, and it's not purgatory either, like Catholics use it. So
no.
what's the deal for the other people who aren't part of this elite 144,000?
Okay, so there's two destinations. You are either judged worthy to be part of the great crowd that goes through Armageddon and looks after the paradise earth, or if you're judged not worthy, then you just cease to exist. They do not have a hell teaching. They do not believe in an afterlife. You're just dead. Death
Okay.
is the opposite of life to them, and you just cease to exist and be.
Okay.
Now,
Well,
you
that's
asked
certainly
earlier,
better than infinite
yeah,
torture. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll take that. We'll take that.
Yeah.
But you asked earlier about all the other people that have died that, they're just born in the wrong time or whatever. So they do teach that after Armageddon and the great crowd in the new world, right, there will be a resurrection. So that all of those that have died that did not have the opportunity to make a decision will now have the opportunity to make a decision.
Hmm.
During that time, Satan is not destroyed. He is in the great abyss. And at the end of 1,000 years, he is let out. He's let out to do what he can, run amok. And that is then the final of the final tests to prove who is worthy to then live forever and ever on earth in paradise.
Wow. So I saw a video from, I don't remember if the whole channel is from an XJW, but certainly this segment was, and it was two witnesses coming to a house to try to convert the person. And when they left, the talking to said, "Well, I want this house. If she doesn't convert, no, I want this house." So then I thought, "Wow, that's like yes." So if the house is going to be empty because they're not JW, it's kind of a conflict of interest to try to talk them into joining if you want their house. It's like, is that
I
in any
know.
way realistic?
I remember having those conversations as I went door to door too. I know it's the subset in the culture. You don't really think about how deeply disturbing that really is. You really don't, because you're so indoctrinated and so convinced that you are right that you just have no awareness of how gross that really is.
So yeah. So let's talk about the indoctrination. What did it take to get you to believe all these things?
Well, I was third generation, so I didn't really have a choice. My parents, my grandparents, were all Jehovah's Witnesses. So you are raised that way. You don't know any other way. I can't tell you what the experience was of knocking on my first door. I can't tell you what my experience was of going to my first meeting because I was a baby. It was always there. They don't separate children from parents at their meetings. So you are all sitting together throughout meetings. Every Jehovah's Witness is expected to go door to door. It's not like the Mormons where you have missionaries that do a 2-year stint. Every Jehovah's Witness is obligated to go from door to door.
So
So,
male and female?
correct. Yes. Um, so you're drip fed pretty much right from the beginning, and you don't have anything to test it against. You're not allowed to test it against anything else because this is the one truth. So yeah, and the indoctrination, like at that point, so this is in the late 70s, early 80s, there are 5 meetings a week. You have to prepare and study in advance for each of those meetings. 4 of them are audience participation. So you have to have prepared in advance a response or an answer or something in those meetings. In the weekends or on the weekends, you are going from door to door. And you also you have return visits, so people that you might have met on the door that showed a little bit of interest, or maybe they took a Watchtower and Awake magazine, and you would take notes of that and go back a fortnight or 4 weeks later with the new set of magazines, and that would be a return visit. And or some people you'd offer them Bible studies, and of course, as we'd already established that Jehovah's Witnesses is the only true religion, you are then sharing in that indoctrination. You are then indoctrinating someone else on what the Bible actually teaches. And of course, the Bible has an answer for absolutely every scenario. So you are supremely confident that you can make a big difference in someone's life and save them. I mean, I
So
can remember as a child, I was the only Jehovah's Witness in my school. And you're told as a child that school is your special territory, that these children they're going to die at Armageddon if they don't have the opportunity. But because their parents aren't witnesses, they will end up being killed at Armageddon. And so I literally sat there as a child looking at my classmates thinking, if I don't say something to them, they're going to die and their blood will be on my hands. It will be
wow,
my
what a
responsibility.
responsibility to put on a kid.
Mm,
Wow.
mm.
So did you go to door as a, well, you said as a baby, but like the first time you talked to somebody, like how old would you have been?
Oh, 4, 5, I would have been really young. Um, my distinct memories of starting to have like my own ministry would have been from about 8, 9. I can remember like on the Friday night, um, I would rehearse what I would say the next day to my parents. Like I pretend to do a demonstration, pretend to do a presentation at the door.
Role play.
And
You're role playing with
yeah,
them.
you're role playing. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And as a 9-year-old, I had a few return visits. I had a few people that must have taken pity on the poor girl.
You must have had
Yeah.
somebody laugh at you. Like how does that work?
I look, sometimes yes, and sometimes worse than that. Sometimes, abuse and language. I was scared most of the dogs because yeah, because some of the dogs I can remember a few encounters there that was quite scary. Um, and it's not natural for a child, for anyone really, to go up to the house or the door of a stranger and talk to them. And so I remember being very nervous. Um,
Now, how are you taught to do that? Just because you're, as you said, you're very, very young and you're brought with that you're adults, so you're just trained that's the way you do it. Okay.
yeah, pretty much. And see, I mentioned that there are 5 meetings. 2 of those meetings, the Theocratic Ministry School and the service meeting, are both geared around preaching and teaching to others. So the Theocratic Ministry School, and see, this is the thing that they get into. You think you're actually educated, and that this education they offer is the best, right? Why would you go and get education in the world? We're going to get to probably at some point the fact that they very much discourage university and college, because that's outside of God's arrangement of things, and that's Satan's world. And why would you want to get an education in a world that's going to be destroyed soon anyway? So you think you're getting this education within the religion, and they would do, as part of the Theocratic Ministry School, there would be 3 5-minute talks, and these were the only things that women could participate in. Yes. Um, Women were not permitted and are still not permitted to teach from the platform. They're not teaching the audience. So when you did these 5-minute talks, they were actually acted out scenarios of, and you could come up with whatever the scenario was. You might be talking to someone at the door. You might be talking to a return visit. You might be talking to a friend or a workmate or someone you met on the bus, right? You could come up with whatever scenario, but you would be given a topic that you had to base your 5-minute talk on. You would be assessed on how you introduced the subject, how you concluded, what main points you made, your use of gestures, your use of illustrations, your timing. Like, there was a long list of things that you would be assessed on. And I remember my first talk, I would have been about 7 on the platform doing that. So because you're getting that kind of, I don't even really want it. It's indoctrination. You're using that when you go from door to door, as well as the rehearsals the night before with your parents. So you feel like you're equipped, kind of.
So I've had Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door twice. Well, they probably came when I wasn't home or something. First set, my wife was listening in the other room and she said, "Rob, you were rude." I don't actually remember the conversation, but that was before I joined Recovering from Religion. After I joined Recovering from Religion, I had the second visit, and I did street epistemology on them. They had an iPad, and every time I asked them a question, they would like go through it to try to come up with, "Oh, I've never heard that question before," and they would, and then
Yeah.
they'd say something, and then I asked them another question. I kept them. It had to be for 45 minutes or so, and they said, "Oh, this was an intriguing conversation, but we're out of time. We really got to go. We're going to put you on the list. We're going to come back." They never came back. Am I really on it?
Shocking.
Am I ever on a list that says, "Do not waste your time with this
You
person"?
could be. You could be. So they do have do not call lists where people have specifically said do not call back. Whether you're on that list or not, I don't know. But look, this is probably something little known about Jehovah's Witnesses. They have meticulous records on the territory that they're responsible for. So each congregation, the area around them is literally divided up between that congregation's responsibility. Then the neighboring congregation will have its territory, and they literally have a map in the Kingdom Hall of what territory they're responsible for. And then within that map, you have a territory servant who looks after all of the maps, right? So they're divided up into suburbs and, areas where there might be 10 blocks, 10 street blocks or whatever. And on that map number 28, whatever, on the back of it will be a list of do not calls on that map. And so before you start going out door to door on any given day, they have a field service group. You go through what the day's text is for the day. You might briefly discuss what Watchtower articles we've got to offer, and then they'll have a discussion on, okay, this is where we're going to go for today. And then you all faithfully write down your list of do not calls that you want to avoid. And those do not calls could be for several reasons. It could be someone who is aggressive and who has said, "I don't want you calling back, please put me on the do not call list." Or they could be known to be disfellowshipped, or they could be known to be apostate.
Oh, okay.
That will automatically earn you being on the list.
But I wasn't any of those 3 things.
No, so I don't, that normally would not put you on the do not call list.
I
Uh,
actually I actually purposely wanted to see how long I could keep them there because I
Well, you
felt
did well, 45.
anytime I had them wasted on me, they wouldn't be getting to one of my neighbors. That was my strategy that time.
Yeah. Well, see, where I currently live now, I'm living with my aunt, and she's been in this house for, nearly, it's coming up 50 years. And so my aunt was never a witness. It was my mother that converted. And my mother's conversion caused so much division in the family, that Auntie Bev has been a do not call for decades. Sometimes you forget to look at the do not call list, right? And you accidentally then knock on a door and yeah.
Many Christians may wonder, why is it Jehovah's Witnesses? Why isn't it Jesus's Witnesses or Yahweh's
Mhm.
Witnesses? Why is that a particularly different name that other Christians would not use?
Very good question. Glad you raised it because this is one of the main differences between Jehovah's Witnesses and the rest of Christianity. I mean, one of them we've already mentioned in the no belief of hell. That's definitely unique to them. Um, this other one is that they do not believe in the Trinity. So they believe that God the Father is his own individual, Christ the Son is his own individual, and the Holy Spirit is not a being, it's not an entity, it is the active force with which Jehovah gets things done. So, yes, I just used Jehovah very meaningfully there because Jehovah is, in their theology, is the God the Father. So he is the one that was there before Christ was created. They use, I think it's Colossians 2:10. Goodness me, if I got that right, I'd be not impressed. But there's a scripture in Colossians that said that Jesus Christ was the firstborn of all creation. So they use that to say that the very first thing that Jehovah did when he started his creative works was make Jesus. Um, they also refer to Proverbs, the master worker, I think he was called as well. So they have this very clear delineation between Jesus Christ and Jehovah.
Okay, so they're
Jehovah,
non-Trinitarians or other Christians who are
yes.
non-Trinitarians. But again, where's the name Jehovah come from?
Mm. Well, there's the truth of where it actually came from, which is a priest. But what they teach is that um, the tetragrammaton, YHWH, Yahweh, YHWH, because the Jewish language didn't have vowels or consonants, and that because of Jewish, what's the word I'm looking for? Their fear of mispronouncing the name, given that it didn't have vowels, it actually got buried over time as to what the name of God was. Um, Dead Sea Scrolls reveals YHWH, Yahweh, and so they feel that the English transliteration of that is the closest they can get to is Jehovah. So they use that as the name of God.
So at some point you stopped believing this slowly, I presume. Like,
Mm,
how did that happen?
mm,
What was the
mm.
first inkling that maybe this wasn't all the truth?
It's a really hard question to be succinct about, but I'll give it my best shot. I was one of those types of Jehovah's Witnesses that was a true believer. So at the age of 9, I decided that I was not going to finish my schooling. I would leave at year 10, which I did. So I was about 15, just on 16. And I became a regular pioneer, which is a full-time volunteer within the organization. And that involved knocking on doors 90 hours a month. Which basically was 22 and a half hours a week, so 3 to 4 days a week. I supported myself by working part-time. And I did regular pioneering for 10 years. So I started at 16, didn't finish till I was 26.
Not a lot
Um,
of time to be earning a paycheck if you're doing all that.
and no, no, that'll come around later. Um, at 24, I marry Sasha, and he, like me, was also a full-time volunteer. He was third generation Jehovah's Witness as well. So it had also been all he knew. Um, but being a male, his experience would be different than mine. He started regular pioneering when he was 18. He did complete schooling. He went to year 12. But when he was 19, he applied to work at the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses in Australia. So he's living in Perth. I was in Perth too at the time. He applies to go to Bethel, which is the name of the headquarters in Australia, and that's in Sydney. And I really wanted to go to Bethel. I applied 4 years running. I got knocked back every single time because I didn't have what they wanted, which was being male. So he applied and was accepted straight away. And he moved over to Sydney when he was 19 and lived in Bethel for 5 years. And that's your hardcore stuff, right? You have to sign a vow of poverty to go to Bethel. You're working 6 days a week. You have extra meetings in addition to the 5 that you already have. You've got extra meetings again. And you are given a stipend of about, I can't remember exactly what it was back then, but it'd be around $120 a month. So your food, your housing is taken care of. It's very regimented, very routine, very Sea Org-like, if you think of the Scientologists. But anyway, we got married when I was 24. Sasha was 24 too. And we get to 26, and it's just so hard for both of us to be regular pioneering and make ends meet. Like it's really difficult. And we stopped pioneering. The cracks don't start to show for me as far as I feel about the religion for quite some time. Not until my early 40s. And I realized looking back there were some earlier cracks, but it's too long to go into that. The major crack was in June 2015. And this was when I find out that Sasha had deconverted, but he was still attending meetings. He was still doing all the things.
Well, wait,
He
so
probably,
he went through his deconversion process without you, his wife, knowing about it?
yep,
Wow.
yep, I had no idea. He had started deconverting from 2012. Um, and what outed him was at the time he was running his own business and he had employed one of the young regular pioneer witnesses to do his bookkeeping. And on this particular day, she had fossicked around on his computer and found that he was logged into an ex-Jehovah's Witness forum, which is anathema. That's apostasy. That is the worst of the worst. And so she immediately went to tell the elders. Like she saw his username, she saw some of the comments he'd been making on this forum. And by this point, 2015, he had been very, very active and was not complimentary by any stretch about the witnesses. So the next day, this employee rings Sasha to say that she's resigning. And this comes as a bolt out of the blue to both of us. I'm in the car at the time overhearing the conversation, and Sasha's like, well, why are you resigning? What's happened? And she's like, you know why. And then she hangs up. And I'm like, what's going on? So he keeps trying to call her back. She doesn't answer. He ends up calling her father, who's one of the elders in the congregation. And he tells Sasha, oh, we're so upset. We're so distressed. We had to have an emergency elders meeting about you this morning. You've been on apostate websites. Now, I don't hear that part of the conversation. I can just see Sasha. He's looking at me as this elder is telling him this. And then after he gets off that phone call, Sasha has to tell me what's happened and that he's been on apostate websites. And that literally is like taking the carpet away from underneath my feet, because now I don't know where things stand at all, right? If you've been on apostate websites, does that mean you don't believe in the religion anymore? that was a really painful weekend for both of us because I was scared to ask the questions. I was scared of his answers, and he was just as scared as I was. But through those questions, I began to learn that not only did he no longer believe in the religion, he didn't believe in the Bible or God anymore. So not only was he an apostate, but he was an atheist.
That's a big conversion to go through without telling your wife you're even questioning anything.
Well, and he couldn't tell me. He couldn't tell me because the Jehovah's Witnesses allow for divorce in two settings. One is adultery, right? Breaking of the marriage through adultery. The other is apostasy, um, because then you are in a spiritually endangered position, right? And for a woman whose spiritual head is her husband, and he now no longer believes, that means that I'm in a position of danger. And I knew that if I wanted to leave him, I would have the full support of the congregation. In fact, I have heard of stories where women have been told to leave their husbands. And Sasha was really concerned that I would leave him. So it was a difficult time for both of us. And I remember going to a meeting after this news had occurred, and I had never felt so uncomfortable in a Kingdom Hall ever before. It was that you walk through the doors and you can hear a pin drop. Right? The grapevine had done its work, and everybody knew. And it was horrible, so uncomfortable. And I also began to notice that the elders had gone into this defense mode. They were terrified of Sasha and what he could do, what he could, how he could talk to others. Um, and they were very anxious to get enough ammunition on him to disfellowship him. But they couldn't because they have this ridiculous two witness rule. You have to have two witnesses to something. They had Alyssa's word, and they were phoning me throughout the week to get information from me. I wasn't quick enough at the time to realize what they were doing. They were looking for a second witness, but I didn't have any information. I didn't have any knowledge. So they couldn't disfellowship him. And they tried to get Sasha to go to a judicial committee where you've got a panel of elders where they will grill you basically. And Sasha just refused to comply, which was, you can say no to the elders? Really? I'd never seen this before. Like, but he just flatly refused. He was like, if you want to have a cup of tea or coffee, catch up, no problem. But if you're doing something official, no, I will not be going. So he remained undisfellowship for quite some time. I stopped
Wait,
going
I'm
to
sorry, say that
meetings,
again. He remained what?
undisfellowshipped.
Undisfellowed. I've never heard that term.
Yeah, so he had not been disfellowshipped. He didn't get disfellowshipped until 2019.
But he was still on the
Um,
outs in some way.
oh,
That's
way on the outs. Oh, yeah, yeah, because you like they had enough to know that he was an
so. But is
apostate.
there a term for that besides just undisfellowshipped?
Inactive, I suppose, would be the most appropriate term, but I think they would instead use the apostate one because that has a lot more power and is going to make people avoid him like the plague.
And what are the
And so,
repercussions for people who don't know of being disfellowshipped?
oh, instant shunning from all of your family, your social network. You are entirely isolated. That is the first thing that happens when you're disfellowshipped. Um, for us, we started to get the shunning immediately anyway because of the apostasy. So as soon as I had found out what had been happening, um, the silence happened immediately. So from that very first, the last meeting that we went to, nobody came up to me. Nobody phoned me to see how I was at all. And I felt quite betrayed by that. It also brought home very strongly that women don't matter. Women don't have a voice. I was collateral damage. I was just part of, and because I didn't make a stand and leave him, I knew what was expected. I knew that if I continued to go on the meetings, it would have to be by myself. And I knew I'd get the pity of the congregation, but there would be no other support. And I was disgusted with what they were doing to Sasha because I saw someone in pain. I saw someone who was deeply distressed at something that he knew what the ramifications were. He knew what the repercussions were, and he was scared. I saw someone who needed support, not vilification. So I stopped attending. Even though if you'd asked me at the time, I would have said I still believed in the religion. But there had been a slow degrading. We didn't have children. That's a whole other story. I started working full time and I felt at a loss. I felt like I didn't fit into any group in the congregation anymore. So I threw myself into my career. And that is also not advisable because it's taking you away from the congregation. So there had already been a bit of a, I suppose, distancing. So I just threw myself into work, and Sasha and I started to enjoy time together. We started to go out for breakfast on a Sunday morning instead of going to the meeting. But it took 18 months of being disconnected from the constant drip feed of indoctrination before I finally had the courage to do something, which was I read the Australian Royal Commission report into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. And the Jehovah's Witnesses had been case study 29. And
Had
that got,
Sasha seen, did Sasha refer that to you?
yes. So the timing. Our last meeting was June 2015. The actual commission for the Jehovah's Witnesses, where they were on the stand and testifying, started July 2015. Sasha had told me that they were there, and I didn't want to see it. I would have found it way too confronting at that point. I knew where there's smoke, there has to be fire, and if they're there, there has to be some reason. The government's not going to put those resources into investigating an innocent organisation. But it wasn't until, and it was a funny set of circumstances, Rob, because I was actually in Melbourne for a work thing, and I was sitting at the airport on the 30th of November 2016, and the report had been released just 2 days before. And my flight was delayed. And so I texted Sasha, I'm like, I've got an extra hour here to wait for the plane. And he sends back as a joke, well, you could pass the time by reading the report. And I'm just like, I literally send back, ah, ha, 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 that's going to piss me off. But then I'm like, why don't I have a look? And so I don't tell him. I don't tell him. I look it up on my phone, find it, Google surprisingly easily, and I start reading. And it was 110 pages, but the way it was written was very detached. It was legal. It was just statesman of facts, right? And they used two particular cases. They de-identified the survivors and used acronyms for them. So there was BCB and BCG. They were the two cases. And as I read BCB, I started to recognize circumstances around that case where it was the elders involved. I began to horrifyingly realize I knew who the perpetrator was and that I had been in the very house that is where it had happened. And then watching or listening to BCB's experience and what she had endured and gone through. And she didn't disclose until after she was married, and the abuse affected relations in her marriage, and she disclosed to her husband, and then they went to the elders and told them, and it was so clear that the elders did not believe her at all. And as I read through that, The fact that every single elder, circuit overseer, Bethel representative that testified at the Royal Commission, not one of them had read the testimony. It was absolutely horrific. So reading that report, I literally deconverted from the Jehovah's Witnesses within the space of reading that report. Like I felt the whole house of cards just come tumbling down, and I was obsessed. I remember standing in the queue to get on the plane, phone like this, getting on the plane, sitting there as we take off, phone, just I can't stop. Get off the plane, waiting at the baggage claim. I'm in the cab going to work. Like my whole world is turned upside down, and somehow I work that day. I don't quite remember how, but then when I get home, first thing I say to Sasha when I get through the door is, "It's a cult." And he's like, "What?" I said, "I read the report. It's a cult." And I was really lucky that I had someone to support me through that process, um, because it was incredibly destabilizing. Sasha was the only one I could talk to. I couldn't talk to anyone else. I remember that weekend, a lot of the Royal Commission testimonies were on YouTube. So Sasha showed me how I could find them so I could actually watch the testimonies. I could watch Angus Stewart, who was the senior counsel, questioning these elders. I could hear the actual testimonies of BCG and BCB, read them out. I could hear the response of the commissioners. Those elders, it was so abhorrent the way they behaved. It was clear they saw the whole commission as an attack on them. It was Satan attacking the organization. They did not accept any responsibility or accountability in any way, shape, or form at any point, and they still don't to this day. A result of the commission was an independent body called the National Redress Scheme, so that survivors could have a way of getting some kind of compensation for what they had endured. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were the very last to join that scheme, and they only joined it because the government forced their hand by threatening to remove their tax-exempt charity status. They then complied, but two conditions had to be met. One was the redress scheme determines the amount, the sum that is to be paid to the survivor, capped at 150,000. And the organisation doesn't get a say on that. They don't get a rebuttal. They don't get to make a defence. And they also have to issue an apology. To this date, they have paid out claims. They are yet to issue one single apology. In fact, one survivor contacted me after she'd just received a phone call from Bethel. And she's like, "Sherrie, you're not going to believe this. I've just had a phone call from a Bethel elder who said to me, 'So we've got to write this apology letter. What do you want us to say?' And she said, 'Defeats the purpose if I have to write my own apology.' Needless to say, she didn't answer it, and she still hasn't received one. And I've spoken to politicians since then, and they have confirmed that there has been no apologies documented and sent out. When you looked at the numbers, Rob, at the time, Australia has a population of about 26 million people. And the Royal Commission had got this group of organisations that they were investigating, and each organisation had to disclose the same thing, which was any records they were keeping on any accusations or allegations of child sexual abuse from 1950 to 2012. Or was it 13? One or the other. When you collated all of that information, 26 million population, 5 million claiming to be Catholic. What documentation they had revealed to the Commission that they had records of 4,444 allegations of child sexual abuse. Now, there is a very important factor here that I must say. We're talking about priests, right? We're not talking about cases that they knew within congregants, right? They all were priests. With the Jehovah's Witnesses, over the same time period, you're talking a membership of 68,000 in 26 million. And they had records of 1,006 perpetrators of child sexual abuse.
So do the math for me there. So
Well, you are at least 4 times more likely to be assaulted and abused in a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall and have it mismanaged than you are in the Catholic Church.
That's impressive.
And that's just looking at the numbers. And yes, there are other little factors in there. Like I said, that with the Catholics, that was mainly priest abuse, whereas with the Jehovah's Witnesses, these were matters that weren't necessarily elders that were the perpetrators. It could have been other congregants, but they were aware of it. And this is the other thing. Jehovah's Witnesses are not taught to go to the authorities when it pertains to a crime. And a lot of the time they see child sexual abuse as a sexual issue. And things like adultery and fornication fall into the same bucket as that, and it gets reported to the elders, right? They don't think this is a crime.
And
You should
so
be going
they
to the
don't go to the
police.
secular authorities.
Very rarely do they go to the authorities. So
And
that
that
they
lets
think,
the perpetrators go on and do it again. Yeah. Yeah. But all right. So, but I do want to ask you, one can have the perception, well, all right, this would be my whole church from what you found out, but still, doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. Doesn't mean there wasn't a Jesus. Doesn't mean like what was going through your head in that regard at this time? Did you just throw it all away at once, or
no,
how'd that go?
I started to, well, I mean, Sasha pointed me to, he was really, honestly, I can't give him enough credit for how he helped me, because he never told me what conclusions to come to or what I was about to find out. What he did was he just pointed me to resources that had helped him. He was like, this website I found helpful, this podcast I found helpful. And then he just let me go from there. And then as I'd find something, I'd go running to him and go, I just found out, blah, 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 blah. And he'd be like, yep. I mean, there was one that I found out. I loosely referred to it earlier about 1914, because that calculation that they had was evidence to me that the Bible was true. And when I found out that the starting position of that prophecy was completely wrong, they had it completely out, I was like, right, I need to go to the New South Wales State Library and have a look at that one. Anyway, I then start to question, all right, the Jehovah's Witnesses is definitely not it. And I'm beginning, like, it's a cult. It's extremely problematic. What do I feel about the Bible and God? Like, if I can be so wrong about this religion, what else am I wrong about? So I started to ask myself, well, why do you say you believe? And as I analyzed that honestly, I began to realize that any of the instances or experiences that I would say I felt the presence of God or I felt a connection were highly emotive states. And I began to realize I had no objective evidence whatsoever. That was all entirely subjective. And I have now just learned not to trust myself. So let's openly examine this. And so I started to look for debates between Christian apologists and atheists. And I came across Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens through that. And as I started to listen to those debates, the atheist way made way more sense. There was so much more logic there. At the same time, Sasha starts to say, well, would you like to meet some other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses? And I'm like, yeah, I think I do. This is huge. It's huge meeting other apostates. And so he organizes for me to meet Paul Grundy, which anyone out there who knows about ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, like Paul Grundy is one of the most well-known ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, responsible for the website jwfacts.com. Like yeah, right? So I'm like, great, let's just go meet Paul. And that was quite impacting because when I met Paul and he asked me to describe myself, I said, I'm an all or nothing person. Like if I'm going to do something, I'm all in. And he stopped me right then by saying, is that you or is that the cult? And I didn't have a response to that. Took me a while to get an answer to that one. But anyway, he invited us he was going to be speaking at Sydney Atheists the next month, giving a presentation on the Jehovah's Witnesses and what it's like to be raised a witness and then to come out of it, what you go through. And I'm like, okay, fine, it's like whatever. And I went along and I signed up as a member. And it was actually during Paul's talk that as he started to talk about the trauma, that I started to have a trauma response right there and then in amongst this full room of people, which was a whole side of things that I had not even considered. I was still in the sort of the mind map of trying to understand where things were at, that I didn't even give thought to the emotional impact and the mental health impact. And so as he started talking about it, I started crying because it was just very confronting. And then it went from there. 2017 was the year of firsts. First birthday, first Easter, first Christmas,
Oh yeah, so some people
first,
might not know this, that Jehovah's
yeah.
Witnesses eschew all holidays,
Hmm.
even
That's right.
Christmas, which that
Even
one
Christmas.
surprises
Oh,
me.
especially Christmas,
Yeah,
Rob.
I mean, the supposed
Especially.
birth of I don't get what I could see. Okay, you're not important. We're not going to do your birthday or your anniversary, but I don't understand the Christmas thing.
Oh, no, there's very solid footing actually for Christmas
Uh,
because it's pagan, right? It was never celebrated until the third, fourth century, until Roman Emperor Constantine brought it about. And he was merging the Roman celebration of Saturnalia with a Christian concept to unite that. And a lot of the Christmas traditions come from that Roman celebration of Saturnalia, the gift giving, and that all comes from.
I actually think
So
they got that part right. I think that's all
yeah,
true.
yeah, it is. I like that's the only solid footing there.
Yeah,
And similar with Easter and with, the eggs and the symbols of fertility and stuff like that. They're like, no, that's pagan. It's not in the Bible to and as I said right at the beginning, if they will go by the Bible. If the Bible doesn't have it. So yeah, 2017 was all of that. It was just, I remember we went into just a pokey room in a club because gambling is out of the question too. You can't even walk through a casino as a Jehovah's Witness. And we had no idea what we were doing. It was just a matter of we weren't allowed to do it before. And literally, Rob, I developed a list of all the things I couldn't do. And even now, I still find things on the list that I haven't done. And I just have to do it just because. Just because I have to, because I couldn't. So, yeah,
I won't ask you to
2017.
read. I won't ask you to read the list and tell us your check mark.
No, no, I know. Oh, yeah, I've still got items on there, but I've knocked off quite a few. But yeah, that was 2017, and then 2018, I started to really sort of develop my own who I am and what I want to do and be, and I start to get involved in activism and helping other people.
You're a volunteer recovering from religion. How did you find them, or was there an organization before that? And like, yeah, what's the story with all of that?
I was very ex-Jehovah's Witness centric at that point. And there is a bit of a belief amongst ex-JWs. You feel it the most when you first come out that this is unique. No one else experiences this, right? So I get quite involved in the ex-witness community, and Sasha and I host an event in 2019 because we've recognized that a lot of the the language is trauma-based and negative. And Sasha and I want to do something to be more positive and to show that recovery is possible and that we can lead better lives now. Yeah, we've had crap happen, and so I organised an event in June 2019. To date, it's still the largest ex-Jehovah's Witness gathering in Australia. We have 134 people come along from all over Australia, some from New Zealand. I had managed to organise an activist in LA who brought a film crew with him. They were doing a documentary called The Truth About the Truth. Another very well-known activist in Croatia who came over with his family. Another activist from Maryland, Baltimore, who has got a website called jwchildabuse.org. He is now actually an expert witness to law firms on the damages of the religion, and he's collated or so many, sadly, so many cases and their outcomes. And I somehow, and I still to this day don't know how I managed to pull this off, but I had reached out to Angus Stewart, who was the senior counsel for the Royal Commission, and I'd sent him an email to thank him for the work of the commission, and he replied. I would later find out that he read every single email that XJ Dubs sent to him, and he responded to most. The work he did on the J Dubs, he described as being the most meaningful of his career. And so I invited him to this event. And by this time, he's no longer a lawyer, he's a federal justice. But he comes.
Nice.
And I held it up my sleeve. I didn't let everybody know that he was coming. And so seeing just the rest of the XJ Dubs freak out that Angus Stewart, who we're like, oh, you are amazing. He actually interviewed, he questioned one of the governing body. That's like questioning the Pope. So he was there and he stayed for 3 hours. He was so generous with his time. He took photos with people. He signed books. It was amazing. It was amazing. We had some exes talk about how they've recovered. There was one who talked about her artwork and how art helped her work through her trauma, and we just made it very positive. It was an incredible afternoon, and sort of when it finished, when it ended, I had about 6 people come up to me with their email addresses and phone numbers, because we were working along at that point with a very well-known activist. Sasha was the first responder to emails coming in, and people knew that. So they were giving us their details to say, if you come across someone that you think I might be able to help, you've got my consent to pass on my details. And so after that, I'm like, what am I going to do next? I've got all these details, but that means I'm keeping personal information. There's privacy concerns. Like, what if I get it wrong and I don't put the right person with the right person? And anyway, I talked to one of my very dear friends who's an ex-witness in the US, Shanna Rubio. And I tell her this conundrum, like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know, this. She says,
I think I recognize that name. Is she a
I
volunteer
thought you
here?
might.
I think she's a
Yeah.
volunteer here. Yes.
Not only that, she's volunteer coordinator for Recovering from Religion, and she's
Yeah.
on the board. And so I did not know this about Shanna. And so she tells me, she says, so I'm on the board for Recovering from Religion. Now, because I'd been slightly exposed to RfR at this point, but it was through other podcasters like Seth Andrews or The Atheist Experience. So I heard about this organization, Recovering from Religion, but didn't really know much about it. And so Shanna's like, you need to talk with Daryl Ray. Okay. So she tees it up, and I remember it vividly. It's August 2019. So it's just 2 months after that event. And I'm driving to work and chatting with Daryl Ray, and I'm telling him the things I've done. And Daryl just says, you know what? It's great what you want to do, because I'm thinking I'm going to start an organization in Australia to help people with religious trauma. And Daryl's like, well, look, we've already got all the policies and procedures and the training, and I'm not precious about it. So why don't you go through the volunteer process that will expose you to all the procedures and the policies, go through the training of either helpline or support groups that'll give you what the training is, and then do what you want with that. So I'm like, okay, go through the volunteer process, go through support groups. I go to organise the very first support group in Sydney in March 2020. Needless to say, that did not actually happen.
I think that
2020 had
month
other
is a
plans.
specific thing which happened historically.
Mm-hmm.
Lockdowns.
Lockdowns. So it went online. And the first group was in April 2020 online. And man, did I find my home. Just listening to other people's stories. And it was very XJW centric in the first few groups because where I advertised it, I was only exposed to XJWs at that point. And then when I started to find other groups, we then started to get a shift and get other religions in. So we had some ex-Muslims. Sydney Anglicans, I had no idea were a bit of a cult. And of course, we had Hillsong as well and all sorts of other varieties. We had a few ultra Orthodox Jews and Mormons. It was fantastic just having that group start, but I wanted more. Um, I really wanted to bring recovering from religion to Australia because I could see that there was more required. But I was waiting for the right people to come along who would have the bandwidth to, volunteering takes an effort. Um, and it wasn't until the end of 2020, sorry, that Sean reached out to me, who I'd somehow found the ex-Mormon community. It was a private Facebook group, and I had made a request to advertise the support group in it. And Sean was one of the administrators of the group. In fact, he'd set the group up. And he let the post go through. And then I think it was a month or two after that, he reached out to me and he said, I really like the sound of this recovering from religion. Tell me more. So I told him about it. And he was like, I really like the sound of this. I think I want to be involved. And because of what he had done when he came out of Mormonism, he'd set up his own podcast and YouTube channel and had been very prolific with his content. I'm like, I think this is someone who might be able to help me do what I want to with RfR. And so I asked him if he'd be interested in being part of a leadership group. And I approached a few others and we got a little leadership group together that would meet once a fortnight to look at, okay, what can we do in Australia? And once I told Daryl Ray I was doing that, he then came back to me a few weeks later and said, we would like to invite you to be on the board. And he started to tell me a bit about it. I didn't really let him get very far before I was like, yes, absolutely. Do I want to be part of this? For sure. So I started on the board in January 21 with the not audacious title of International Development Director. Daryl was like, well, look, you're trying to bring it to a new country. We haven't done that before. We do have international volunteers, but you're wanting to actually bring all the bells and whistles to it. Learn through the process and work out a template that other countries can follow then if we come across others that want to do that. So I'm like, okay. We start with Australia. Really great move because Australia is regulated to the hilt. But anyway, I can now say in February 26, last year we finally succeeded. November 25, we finally we had our charity status. We are a not-for-profit company, so we've got all of like the hoops you have to jump through. It would be so much easier to just be a religion. Alas, we're not. So we've got to meet all the criteria. And then finally in November, we get the one thing that we've been waiting all this time for. It was one of the main reasons why we went down this pathway, and that's so that we could give tax deductible receipts for any donations. So now things are hitting the tarmac, and I'm the treasurer and public officer for the Australian board. I'm still on the US board as well. And it's taking off. We've got just on 30 volunteers now. We have a thriving support group that meets face to face in Perth twice a month. We have a group in Mount Gambier in South Australia. We have a group in Brisbane now. They've met twice. And just last week, was it last week? No, it was the week before. I attended, finally, the very first in-person group in Sydney. It was just, I can't describe how satisfying and fulfilling it was to be there and see that. We had 11 people come. We had 3 ex-Muslims. Honestly, it was a really intense group. We had such an array, but the feeling at the end and just that the catharsis that people feel after sharing. The final comment as everybody was saying goodbye was, "We need this more. We need more of it." And I can't describe how fulfilling and satisfying it is. You've heard Daryl Ray talk about the emotional paycheck.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
volunteering, yeah, right. So you're not getting paid money, right? So you want to make sure that your volunteer efforts are giving you what it is that you want. And I told Daryl the next day that Sydney support group was my year's worth of emotional paycheck. It was absolutely fantastic.
So what is the connection? I'm still not clear on this between the original RfR group, which is American based, and yours. So because you had to jump through other hoops from Australia and all that sort of thing, and you have and recovering from religion, the basic one has support groups, and they have the
Mm.
phone lines and a chat group and the psychotherapy project and that kind of thing. Are you trying to duplicate or mirror all of those in Australia, or just the support groups? What's the story there?
So I think support groups was the natural way to start it, more than the helpline because that's one-on-one. Um, so support groups has been a really good mechanism to bring public awareness to the issue, as well as providing services. But as far as a lot of the other programs, we're not at this stage trying to make it duplicate the effort. We do have our own website now, so recoveringfromreligion.org.au, and our website does look quite different to the US site at this point in time. Um, there are criteria that we have to meet that's a bit different to the US organization. So our charity status is that we are a harm reduction charity. So a lot of our programs need to be, we need to make sure that that is in line with our vision, our mission, our business plan, our constitution. Um, so the support groups definitely do support that side of it. But if somebody calls the helpline via our website, it will go to the main pool in the US. The resources library link will go to the resources library in the US. We have done some work on the volunteering process to make that more of an Australian experience. That's not all, I don't think we've got all of it covered. Sean could probably talk way more to that because not only Sean's on the board, he also looks after the volunteers and he also helps with the volunteering. So he's more au fait with what that process looks like. We have monthly meetings with all of our volunteers so that they know that, so that there's a connection between what the board is doing and what the experience is for the volunteers. We want to keep that very close. But we also report back to the mothership, to RfR International in the US, because we are very much wanting to make sure there's no mission drift and that we're in lockstep with the goals and the objectives of RfR US. There have been a few little things that, I don't know why I say little, they're actually quite big, things that we have started. So Sean and Chris is our chair and president. He's also an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Um, they Sean started RfR Stories, which is on the Recovering from Religion channel. And the reason why they started that was Sean was recognizing that in the support group, there isn't really the platform to do a deep dive on your story. You've only got a few minutes to introduce yourself, especially when you've got numbers. And he was feeling that people were really wanting to share more. So he felt RfR Stories could give that platform. And it's based off Mormon Stories because Mormon Stories does that, right? It gives that platform for a deep dive into someone's um, history and journey. And so RfR Stories started from that. And that's humming along. That's doing really, really well. People are responding well to that. We managed to get, if anybody listening to this, I've talked about the Royal Commission. If you want to hear an inspiring story, you need to go to RfR Stories and look for Chrissy Foster. I think she's the 4th interview. Chrissy Foster is the reason the Australian Royal Commission happened. 2 of her 3 daughters were sexually abused by Father O'Donnell in Victoria. And ever since her daughters disclosed that to her in 1996, she fought the Catholic Church. She took them on. She took Cardinal Pell on. She made the Melbourne response happen. She made the Victorian parliamentary inquiry happen that then led to the Australian Royal Commission. And interestingly, I also appreciated Chrissy sharing what Catholicism did to her as a child. We're not talking about sexual abuse, but just the teachings. I really saw a different side with some of what she shared. So I highly recommend hers. It's fantastic. And then there's another little podcast called Unshackled, which 2 other board members, so Chris and Joanna Brown have. It's more short form and it's more just shooting the shit about whatever topic. But now that we've got all of the charity status, we're now this year getting really serious about fundraising and what type of things we want to accomplish this year. So one of our plans that we're working on is a trip from Darrell Ray to come to Australia and do a tour in October. We are working out all of the things around that. There is a conference in New Zealand called Decult in Christchurch. It'll be the 2nd Decult conference. And I'm trying to do what I can to get Darrell to be speaking at that, because then we will arrange a tour of New Zealand as well. But that will really help us launch more and more of what recovering from religion in Australia can do. We're also working with a group of secular organizations. So think your secular, your coalition in America that has those, I think there's 20 secular organizations that are part of that group. We now have an Australian group, the Australia Secularism Forum. And we're working along with them for this year's census. So we have a census every 5 years. Our last census in 2021 showed the no religion group to be increasing rapidly. It showed 39% said they were no religious. Yep. We have every reason to think that this year will show even more, but we're working on our marketing campaign, and we're trying to get in contact with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, because the question is very leading. What religion are you? It presupposes you have a religion. So we want them to change that to do you, or if you have one, right? Let's just open that up a bit, because otherwise people will answer culturally and they may not be practicing, and that's skewing the stats. So Recovering from Religion Australia gets to be part of that as well. So it's really, really exciting. I'm thrilled at where we are and very excited at what we can do. There's going to be some things that we can do here that the US hasn't been able to. For example, I was a industry fellow with a university for a while, and we were trying to promote and raise awareness about religious trauma so that we could get some research done, because to make any change, policy change at government level, you've got to have the stats and the data to support that there is a problem. And you can only do that if you've got a university with you to help you do those studies and research. So we have spoken with several universities. We're trying to collaborate with something there. And we're also trying to grow the Secular Therapy Project. We do have about 14 registered therapists in Australia and New Zealand, but we obviously want that to grow. And we now have 2 clinical leads in Perth. Both of them are clinical psychologists. And we've got plans there as well to grow the professional arm so that Australian citizens suffering from religious trauma can get access to Australian services that understand. One thing we definitely want to plan on is a fall excursion. We want
Oh,
to
yes,
do
nice.
something like that. Yeah, we want to do a retreat
Except your
once we
fall
can get the
excursion will
numbers.
be the opposite time of the year from the
Yeah,
American fall excursion.
exactly. That's like spring. Mm. And we don't call it fall, we call it autumn. So I don't know. We'll work something out. What a conundrum to have, right?
Okay, I think we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for sharing your
That's
story, and the synergy sounds fantastic between RfR Australia and RfR. That yeah,
yeah.
and it seems it'll just get better in the future. So thanks so much for all your efforts there, and
Thank
thanks
you.
again for coming on.
Well, thanks for giving me an opportunity to share my story and also all the wonderful stuff we're doing in Australia. So yeah, thank you.